Hello, and welcome to the Narrowing Path, Walking the Spiritual Walk. My name is Stephen Eiderstein, and thank you for joining me as we do today's episode on the review of Chapter 11. And the reading, there was a lot. There's so much involved with the reading in Chapter 11. When I read it, there was just so much that rang true. So I'm excited to kind of go through this chapter and tear it apart a little bit. So I hope y'all are excited to join me. So if you're new to this series that I'm doing, we are reading a book titled I Was a Pagan by V.C. Kitchen. There you go. That's the spine of the book I read out of. Now, when I do the chapter reviews, I use this book because I like to highlight and underline and write in it. So I use this because I don't want to mark up an original copy. So I'm looking forward to it. So let's go ahead and we'll dig right into this. And also, if you like this type of content, if you like spirituality, spiritual growth, personal development, understanding, please don't hesitate to give us a subscribe, give us a like. You can follow us on Facebook as well. And we also are on Spotify and Apple Podcasts. So go ahead and follow us there too if you'd like. So here we go. We're going to go over Chapter 11. Now, Chapter 11 is called The Business of Being Remarried and the subheading of Wedlock. Now, it's just so interesting to see how the problems back then, and again, this was written in the 1930s. I think the book was published in 34. I'm not exactly sure of the time frame he was writing this book. But V.C. Kitchen's account of what was going on in society and in all aspects so far, it just makes me realize that the problems we're going through today really aren't anything new. These are things that we've been facing for a very long time, and some are worse today, some are a little better today, but we still have a lot of the same exact problems, right? And that does not exclude marriage. That does not exclude romantic involvement in romantic relationships. So it's awesome to be able to read this and just identify how it still shows up today, right? And how things like really do come to fruition. And there's at least one spot I'm thinking of with that. So let's go ahead and we'll get into it. And I just think it's really quite funny how he opens this up. He opens this up with him disclosing what at one point was his a concept he developed for what a real successful marriage would be, because he came to the belief that just one woman wasn't going to be enough in a relationship and just one man wasn't going to be enough in a relationship. And he talks about how it was a communal marriage with a half dozen women, including a good cook, a good mistress, a good mother, and a half dozen men, including a good money maker, a good love maker, and an intellectual or two. And it's just so funny because that first thing he opens with, that people still talk about that today. People still make jokes about that. People still think that this is a new idea, right? And he goes into, again, this is in the probably late 20s, early 30s that he's writing this book. And he says, no doubt to the free thinkers who demand free love, does that sound like a familiar term? Yeah. Companionate marriage, more liberal divorce laws, and other forms of easy promiscuity, right? That's exactly what gets asked for today. That's exactly what has come to fruition today. That's exactly what people still talk about today. Like they still try to demand the old concepts, right? And easy promiscuity, right? Hookup culture today, where there's so many dating apps. It's so casual to have just multiple relationships, one right after the other, or multiple at the same time, and it's just this. And that idea is cloaked in this progressive language, right? Like it's a new idea, or this is a new era, right? New era of sexuality and relationships. And in reality, it's just the same old song and dance, just rehashed again. And people have been trying to work out ways to get more sex without commitment. And for as long as people have been writing books, I just think it's funny. Everyone believes this is a new thing, and it might be a new way. It might be maybe even a little exaggerated than previous. But if you look back at history, there's always this sexual revolution of some sort, or this encouragement of this hookup culture, and just pick your era and how that looks. So it's just really interesting. It's not like all this stuff that's going on. It's not new. It's just not new. Like this has been a battle that's been being fought for a very long time. So no, I just find it comical that people really think it's this modern idea that's happening, and it's just really not. It's just really not. So he says in there too that monogamy is the new thing, and it's the new way to behave. It's the new way to have a relationship, and it just really hasn't been practiced effectively all that much. The hookup culture, the casual sex, the casual relationships, repeated relationships, things like that. That's all how it's always been, right? That's always that was used to be the standard. We hear about all this other stuff that's going on, and we think that it's always been one man, one woman. It's not, and it's been the most modern concept is a monogamous relationship, right? And so yeah, he quoted somebody here, and G.A. Studdard Kennedy suggests that tried and found difficult and not tried enough is what he called monogamy. So it's and that's where we're going to kind of venture into. So he talks about this thing, and he talks about a new way, a new dynamic to have in a relationship called holy wedlock. And he makes sure to let us know that it's not just a marriage recognized by the church, right? Like, because it could easily be construed as that, but it's got much more depth to it. So I'm actually going to read his definition of it, and if you're following along, it's on page 149 here, about halfway through that second paragraph. And so I'm going to go ahead and read it, and we can talk about it a little bit. Its name is holy wedlock. I do not mean simply a marriage sanctioned by the church. There are plenty of those which are far from holy. I mean a marriage entered into neither for its selfish, sensuous satisfactions, nor for its social economic consequences, but for the purpose of spiritual growth. I mean a marriage where both parties contract not only with each other, but with their maker. I mean a marriage which successfully and joyously carries out the marriage vows. I mean a marriage in which bride and groom fully and freely surrender self-will, not becoming a henpecked husband or a submissive wife, but a man and wife hand-picked for each other under God's guidance and submissive to his will. So, a wholly different concept, not because it'll serve you socially and economically, not because you're just looking for not because men are just looking for a mother of their kids, that not because they just want to enjoy the sensuous side of the relationship, the sexual side of it, right? But a holy wedlock is a commitment to each other, but also a commitment to the God of your understanding, commitment to a life of service, and to build a life that would best reflect God working through that relationship, right? So a relationship that's based in spiritual growth, and it's based in a desire to become closer and understand more that God of your understanding, whatever that might be. Again, remember, however that looks to you. Sorry for the pause there. Technical difficulty. But yeah, so that's a wholly new, different type of definition of marriage, right? And this is one that was spoken about 80 years ago, 90 years ago, longer than that ago, almost 100 years ago, right? So this is a concept that's still been lost today. So many marriages today are based on so many superficial things, whether it's money or strength of social status, or marriage of convenience, even, or companionship. Right? It's so much deeper than that. It's so much more than that, right? And I love that definition. I love how he brings the central focus of a marriage and a relationship like that to be God-centered and God-focused. Because there's so many people that approach it with a wrong perspective and a wrong understanding. So, the next part that that he goes into here, it's pretty much the opposite. He's saying, he starts talking about how it looks a lot of the time right now, and back then, right now, and also right now. I think this is part of this chapter that when you look at things, it's gotten worse. Maybe worse isn't the right word. These traits have grown and they've become more prominent in relationships, right? And so, which would be holy wedlock would be people focused on God and not themselves or each other, right? And bringing a marriage under God's guidance, and to provide that contented marriage. And if you don't do that, the opposite would be a broken marriage, a marriage that breaks down, one that is selfish and self-centered on both sides, right? One that doesn't have God actually brought into it. So, the page 150, I'm going to read his comments on the more typical approaches to wedlock, right? It's the second paragraph there. Other forms of wedlock may as well be called deadlock. I find that interesting. For they simply mean the bringing of two self-centered people together, each revolving on a different axis and thus bound to clash. They may tolerate each other as long as they are nice to each other. I liked my husband, as one wife admitted, because of the nice way he treated me. But when this treatment begins to cloy, when romance flattens like a stale champagne, they soon enough return to their own self-centered ways of living. I have seen mothers train their daughters before marriage to gain and hold the upper hand. These mothers have long since learned that the give and take of marriage is largely a matter of just giving in today so that you can get the better of your better half tomorrow. Wow, if that's not a definition of today's and society's perspective on this whole thing, right? How many people get married for the money then divorce after they've waited long enough to get 50%? How many people have married with no real consideration for their partner? They just wanted another parent to raise their children with. How many people enter into these things for selfish and self-centered reasons? How many people enter into a marriage because they feel obligated to, right? Where they just want to get rid of some sense of guilt and shame and avoid a potential regret, right? Those are all selfish and self-centered things. Those are all horrible reasons to start relationships, horrible reasons to start marriages, right? Like I underlined, starred, and highlighted for they simply mean the bringing of two self-centered people together, right? Like when you do that, if you picture that, it's just two people clashing head to head all the time. Because it's two people that got into this relationship for different selfish reasons, and each is trying to take from the other. I thought it was so sad So incredibly sad to read. I have seen mothers train their daughters before marriage to gain and hold the upper hand. But then I think about it and how much of this stuff is on the internet, on these apps. It's not just daughters or mothers training daughters this way. It's not just, it goes the other way too. It's fathers training sons, and it's not just same sex training same sex, though. I don't want to give that idea, but it's kids are being taught to solely look out for themselves. That's it. There's no sacredness to marriage being taught anymore. There's no commitment being respected in marriage anymore. It's viewed as a tool. It's viewed as a weapon. It's viewed as something to leverage. Right? It's used as something to further your own selfish and self-centered agenda, which was not its intention. Right? Maybe not its intention isn't the right way to say it, but more so it's not. Marriage can be used so much more effectively than that. And I don't even feel like saying so used so much more. Marriage can bring in so much more depth to life than what it is being sold as today, right? Than the ridiculous, superficial, materialistic, joke it's been made into. I can't really think of a better way to say that, right? People don't take it seriously anymore, right? And it's sad because after that, and when a relationship gets started under that, right, and it's based on these materialistic or this concern with external appearances, and he goes into that and talked about how that false presentation really bleeds down into the rest of the family too, because two selfish and self-centered people that get together and then they continue to and then have kids, and they teach their kids that, right? Like, it's this hugely just false image that gets portrayed. It's this fear-based false presentation of a perfect put together family that they don't want the rest of the world to see. He says, under the calm exterior, however, was a constant conflict of desires, a conflict of self-centered egos unremittingly at war, right? And everyone wants to look good. Everyone wants to keep up with the Joneses. They want to get the better car. They want to get a better house. They want all of these things that check the boxes to say they're successful, or they at least look successful. And in reality, if you go into the household, it's miserable. There's no love there. It's people just trying to take and take and take out of the relationship or out of the circumstance to get what they want, so they can actually then convince themselves they're happy or they're winning. What a sad state of a relationship that is. What a sad thing to actually pass on to your children, as that's the example of a relationship you should have. And he says those types of relationships will inevitably lead to divorce, because that constant battle, that's misery, just the manufacture of misery in those situations, isn't it? It's just a constant struggle to get what you want. And when you don't, it's resentment. When you don't, it's a feeling of disregard, right? It's a feeling of unappreciativeness. It's there's no gratitude. There's no love. There's no genuine kindness and compassion left in the relationship, because that's only done when it benefits the other, or when it benefits oneself in those types of relationships. So what's that do? Eventually, right? He said that quote about the kind. My husband was kind. I liked my husband. He was kind to me. I liked the way he treated me. Well, if for some reason she doesn't think he's being kind anymore, he's not treating her exactly how she wants to be treated, she leaves, right? So the relationship is based purely on the utility. And that's just heartbreaking, And when that's the situation. No wonder things lead to divorce. We have the most divorce in our culture than ever before. People are just stopping getting married because they don't see the point in it, right? Because the institution of marriage has been eroded to such a dramatic extent that people don't even see it more than just a legality in our society, when really it's a vessel for growth and understanding and spiritual connectedness with another person and a God of your understanding. Like there's so much more that comes from a healthy relationship. But if you don't have that God-centered relationship, if you don't have that understanding and that direction and that common yoking, as some might say, so equally yoked, right? It leads to divorce. I want to read this. Page 152. Then perhaps may come divorce, which in 90% of investigated cases is due to selfishness and nothing else. Divorce, of course, is not, this is italicized in it, is not an avenue of escape. It brings no sublimation of the old self-indulgent desires. No separation from a life partner can separate one from oneself. The first divorce, therefore, is likely to lead to a chain of divorces in the hopeless attempt to get away from one's own personality, and with never any attempt to develop those inner qualities which can lead to a happy marriage anytime and anywhere. So this is a common, very, very common thing stated in rooms of 12-step recovery, but it's caught on a lot in just the self-growth world in general, is the wherever you go, there you are. You bring you wherever you go. Those are two different ways to say it, right? But if you have had 3 divorces, who is most likely the problem? Well, if they're all crazy, they're all they all cheat on me, they all this, they all that. Well, why are you picking those types of people? What are you basing your relationship on, right? Like, I love that he points this part out. He says they go into this relationship with the wrong motives and wrong understanding of it. Then they have this relationship. It goes bad. They get a divorce. And then for some reason they can't figure out, they keep having divorces one after another. Because after you've broken that seal, it's easy to go get another one, right? So if that person doesn't make you happy, move on to the next. If that person doesn't make you happy, move on to the next. That's not their job. That's not the requirement, is that they make you happy. That's your job to take a look at your own self and bring happiness and joy to the table, right? To bring peace and contentment to the table. And if you don't actually take that initiative, if you don't actually do that self-work to grow and become part of something and want to actually change the relationship you're in, right? And if you want to have a different style of relationship or a different outcome in your relationship, you have to do something different. This concept is lost so much. I've talked about it regularly. Nothing changes if nothing changes. You're going to pick the same person with the same type of problems with a different name, and you're going to get and have the same type of relationship. And then guess what? You're going to end up in the same situation again, not understanding what keeps going wrong, and nothing keeps going wrong. It actually is going exactly how it should, because you keep doing the same things every time. It's amazing to me that people don't see that, right? There's so much codependency. There's so much resentment and anger. There's so many harms from their upbringing, people's upbringing, that just don't get resolved. They don't even get considered as a motive for a problem, right? They don't take the honest time to look at themselves and say, hey, I'm going to do this, And he talks about later on, I think at the bottom of that page, is that it's a Christ-like ideal that fixes a marriage as well as everything else, right? We've talked about this, having this Christ-like ideal, regardless of what your spiritual practice is and your religious practice is, or what God you serve, or what you believe that God of your understanding means, right? A Christ-like ideal is still the ideal for all of those. How to conduct yourself in life will fix so many of the problems, will fix so many of the issues going on, right? But instead, we try to just do it our own way, right? So I only bring all that in just to say that the Christ-like ideal doesn't just revert to Christianity, right? If you look at the practices and the teachings of Jesus Christ in the Bible, right, this is a wholly different thing that anyone of any denomination or understanding or perspective can take upon themselves and let it mold and shape their character to improve themselves. And I think that's so important to actually realize. And when you bring that ideal, when you mold your character and aiming for that ideal, you'll get something different. You will change, and then your relationships will change because you'll start looking for different things in that relationship. You'll start looking for people with different qualities than what you've always looked for. It's incredible, actually. It's absolutely incredible. And when you repair that relationship with the God of your understanding, when you actually take that initiative, suddenly you're repairing that relationship with God. And then a friend of mine says that if you work on that relationship with the God of your understanding, they call it a vertical relationship, then your horizontal relationships, your relationships with other human beings, whether it be a friendship, a coworker, or a romantic partner, marriage, all of those will improve, right? So you do one thing. You you strive to have a righteous character and improve the relationship with the God of your understanding. And suddenly your marriage gets better, your job gets better, your coworkers treat you differently, you have different friend group, or your friends treat you differently. It's amazing how just you doing one thing changes the entire dynamic of all of your life, you know? It's amazing to me. Absolutely amazing to me. And then he goes in to talk about why this is going on too. And I do think it's an important consideration. To realize, he calls it this juvenile omnipotence that so many of us have. And it reminds me of 12-step recovery. And you might find this familiar. Egomaniac with an inferiority complex, right? Where we think the whole world revolves around us and should be considerate of us. And then on the same hand, it's almost like we don't believe that at the same time, right? So we demand it from the world, but when it doesn't happen, we think they see how pitiful we are and ashamed of ourselves we are, right? So we bring that self-centeredness and that egotistical view of the world into the relationship. And usually if the one's like that, the other's going to be like that, which I'm sorry to say that's the truth. It's very, very rare you find a healthy person that initiated a relationship with an unhealthy person in that way. But most of the time it's two people that have this juvenile omnipotence. They brought it with them. You brought it with you. And then you have this clash of egos the entire time, right? And then that juvenile omnipotence, I really like that phrase, bleeds into every other part of your life. But if you recenter yourself around Christ, in other words, you take you out of the middle and the middle focus of your world, suddenly it's not all about you. Suddenly you start to mature. Suddenly you start to have consideration and compassion and empathy. Suddenly you have a service-oriented mindset because the world isn't revolving around you anymore. It's not your initiative to make the world serve you in every way, shape, and form, which is very hard for many people to conceptualize. It was very difficult for me to conceptualize, right? Like, I'm speaking from this as a person that has destroyed a good couple of relationships because of my own lack of understanding and awareness and personal growth. I was a very selfish and self-centered person for a very long time. And to be able to say I've made a lot of progress on that is something I'm really grateful for, And I can tell you, striving to have a better, more strength of character in my life and to actually walk towards this righteous ideal, it bled into every single area of my life. It started to improve everything. And it made such an impact in my romantic relationships, and to be able to say, I feel as though I'm a healthy individual, to be able to engage in a healthy relationship, that's a miracle for me. That's something I never thought would be possible. Because now I know, regardless of when you do that, you take the demands off the world. And specifically in the perspective that we're talking about, I take the demands off of my partner, off of my girlfriend. We aren't married, to be fair. I'll disclose that. I take the things that she shouldn't be responsible for back, and I make sure that I'm taking responsibility for what I need to be taking responsibility for. And then there's no unhealthy dynamic that occurs. Suddenly I have peace because I need nothing, right? I don't need the relationship to fill this void for me. I don't need it to serve this role or be this function or right? I've entered into a relationship where it's a common understanding that God should be brought into this. It should be the central focus around this whole thing. I love it. So we're going to move on to this reading today, though, where that peace, he talks about having this peace, and he talks about how he's never been so broke, technically, like financially broke in his life, but has the most peace he's ever had, right? Today, however, I am much nearer to being really broke than I ever was before in my life, and yet at the same time, I am much nearer to my wife and children. Economic difficulty is not the cause of marital difficulty any more than is false psychology. In our own case, in fact, it has been the very reverse. Through teaching us a far deeper dependence upon God, it has brought us into a far deeper unity, and thus the best thing that ever happened to the members of my household. We are, in fact, happier and more harmonious now than any time during prosperity. And there are married people in the group who live entirely on faith and prayer who are the happiest couples I know. Oh, I love that. I absolutely love that. Because it just goes back into the change from selfishness and self-centeredness to service and other-centered, right? And I love that he says that. He's had the least amount of money ever, but he's the closest with his family he's ever been. And the reason for that is because it brought him and his family unit closer to God. It forced them to actually participate in this thing and to find what was really important, right? To actually find what matters in life. What a gift that is. What a blessing it is to finally realize what actually matters in life. To finally say, you know what, we're going to be okay. And have faith and walk in faith in that. I think that's what an incredible thing. What an incredible blessing to have that restructuring of perspective and that peace of mind to trust and believe and have faith more so. To have that knowing that it will be okay. It's absolutely incredible. And he talks about how what we rarely desire is that spiritual alignment, right? And when I start to have that spiritual alignment, I start to change this perspective. I start to love things more than myself. And I start to remove me from the center, right? Like I said, you become God-centered and others-centered. So you start to focus on your children more. You start to focus on your partner more. You start to focus on the other people in your life. And when that happens, it's an amazing thing to actually be able to be a part of. And then you start to have these, like, it will affect it in ways you don't even quite realize. He talks about in the book that the children are now more healthily disciplined than they ever were when he was trying to make them act in a certain way, right? Because they are getting disciplined for the right reason. They are bringing God into their own life. They are bringing this experience into their own life. They are actually having an experience right along with the parents and actually building something like that. And that's amazing, right? Because all of this selfishness goes away and all of this change in behavior then occurs. It's incredible to actually realize and consider that when you bring your children to a God of their understanding as well, and you try to make decisions based in their best interests, not because you want them to look good for you, not because you want them to be a certain way, but to teach them moral and principle in a healthy and understanding way, in all under the understanding that God is centrally focused. It's incredible, actually, to see what can happen with that. So he talks about on page 160 then how it looked after he had reestablished it, right? How his relationship was completely reshaping. So again, this is page 160. There were where once, in other words, physical affinity was about the only bond between us, like that physical attraction, like, hey, I find that you look good, right? And a waning bond at that. We are now united through our children, through our minds, through our interests, through our common work of winning people to Christ, and through an all-enveloping love of God. Right? Nothing to do with themselves, nothing to do with what they wanted. It's all of other people in service, right? We have become a team united and held together, not by some usual irksome ties of matrimonial harness, but by the freely chosen and willing accepted reign of God, right? So that matrimonial harness, that's the law, that's the legality of, I'm going to stay in this, we got married. I don't want to have to go through the process of getting a divorce. It's this and that and convenient. Why would it change? It's too late, blah. Any plethora of reasons. That's the matrimonial harness that he's talking about there. That's such a burden to bear because that means you don't want to be involved in that anymore because it doesn't serve you the way you want it to serve you. Right? So it's changed from, or it's, how did he word it? It's not held together with the matrimonial ties. It's held together because of the understanding and commitment to both people to be of service and bring God into it. The reign of God in the relationship. What an incredible picture that is. How powerful. I absolutely love that. And how it turns into, or how he's talking about how his marriage went from this selfish and self-centered thing to this selfless and self-sacrificing thing. And that's loving authentically. Right? Where you don't get anything out of it. You're not doing things out of fear. You're not doing things out of self-serving motive or self-centeredness or self-absorption and image and perception, but for authentic, selfless service and love and that willingness to sacrifice for another person in your life. That's really what the love is, right? It's not a material sacrifice either. It's a willingness to put time in, to be compassionate and understanding, to be supportive and kind, to actually be a fulfilling partner, not just a pocketbook or a wallet, right? This is to spend quality time and build something together. There's so much more than just money and material things in these relationships, There's something that is mentioned in this book that I thought was very interesting because it gets a different name now. It gets called a narcissist. And but I think it's so true. There's so many people that behave this way and they don't realize it. And they behave this way not realizing that they are being selfish and self-centered. And it's really causing damage to another person. And the other person doesn't realize that they're entering into a relationship so that damage continuously gets caused to them because they haven't healed their own wounds from whatever has occurred to them. So I'm going to read this. It's page 62. And it's kind of eye-opening if you haven't thought about it in this way. So I do not mean that with my efforts to escape, I had become a sort of Bluebeard who was cruel and harsh. I mean that, in common with millions of other unseen husbands, I had spoiled her in early marriage for my own pleasure and for the sake of my own vanity. I tried to make life as luxurious as possible for her, not so much for love of her as for self-love. To flaunt my earning ability in the eyes of other wives and men, I gave her all my money that I did not want myself, but gave nothing whatever of myself for the sake of her soul. Then, tiring of this sport, I abandoned her, socially and spiritually, if not geographically. I sought my escape through other experiments and in office and speakeasy, while leaving her to lead a very thin existence with the children neither of us understood, with church work that held no real significance for her, and a shallow life that had no contacts whatever in the world of reality. Thus I enacted the great American tragedy within the walls of my own home. Right? If you don't realize that swooning period where you want to show off everything about her, you want everyone to know that she's yours, if you want, like you're giving her absolutely everything and you're just what some might call that love bombing, right? That's a common term used today for narcissistic or control manipulative behavior, but a lot of men do it. And it's not because they even think they're trying to do something, right? They think it's what's supposed to happen. That's the way they've been taught to love, is to inundate with all of this stuff, to swoon and overwhelm. And the problem is, once the goal's achieved, the person's abandoned again, right? Like, I'm tired of doing this for you all the time. Well, you set the precedent that was what was going to happen, and they expect these things now, right? And they think that's how you're going to be all the time, and they think you've brought they've grown accustomed to these things, and then you get tired of it, and then you get resentful that it's still something you have to do, and it almost feels demanded or expected of you, and then suddenly it's avoidance, and then suddenly it's separation, and then the other part feels used and manipulated and taken advantage of, and it was never the intention. They just didn't know what they were doing. I didn't know what I was doing when that would happen. I didn't know there was a different way to do it. Now I do, and I do better. Obviously, I've done better. But it's amazing to have this read in here and put in different language, right? Because today it's so psychological and it's put in this clinical terminology. But he says it the way it was written right there was so plain, right? I adore somebody and treat them a certain way because it makes me feel good about myself and it serves me in some way. And when it doesn't do what I need it to for me anymore, I stop it, and then the other person feels completely abandoned in every way, shape, and form in a life that they didn't really know they were getting themselves into, or this is how it would be. Doesn't that describe the state of the United States right now with relationships? It's incredible to me, absolutely incredible to me, how much this is an applicable thing. And how, if you change that, if you take your selfishness out of it and you put God at the center of this relationship, that can change. You can have healthy interaction, healthy beginnings of relationships, healthy ways of doing things. And that is such a blessing. For those that don't know, you can change. For those that don't realize that that's what's happening, there's a different way. So just know that. And then he goes on in this part to talk about how he began to show up for his wife authentically, and they began to truly trust each other and to truly invest in the relationship and be a part of it, right? And the more they worked on themselves and the more they put God at the center, the better the relationship became, right? And the less they demanded of the other and they put that on God and they let the other person be exactly who they were and they didn't try to change them or put them in some box and put unnecessary demands out there on them, they suddenly found that they enjoyed each other's company again, right? And that the entire marriage began to reshape, right? The way they interacted with their children, the way they interacted with the people, their friends, their families, the people of the Oxford group, their church group. It's such just an astounding thing to hear can happen, and to see happen in other people's lives too. I've actually seen it happen, being around the rooms of recovery, being a person walking a spiritual path. I've seen relationships get reconstructed in a few years, and the people just become extremely happy. It's completely possible. It just takes a willingness to change. So, if you can bring God into your relationship, if you can get him as the central focus and ask for his guidance and his input and try to follow that to the best of your ability, you can change not only your own character, but your relationships, your marriages, and your life entirely. It's incredible. So, all right. Well, that's going to be it for today. Beautiful chapter. Love this chapter. And I am looking forward to the next one. The next one's called Chapter 12. I think this is, it's got 18 chapters in it. And that one we just did was the longest chapter too, by the way. So the rest should be a little bit quicker, probably about normal time. This one was just a little bit longer for the reading. But the next chapter, chapter 12, is this business of making a living, economics. Sounds encouraging to me. So I will do that reading next weekend and the review shortly following. So thank you all for joining me tonight, and until next time, thanks.